So much for being here and for your willingness to participate in this review. I'm really excited that we're rolling out a second round of this program. My name is Grace Poots. I'm in the Division of Agricultural Development here at DACCAP, and I'm the Program Administrator for the RFSI program. So today we will kind of go over a brief overview of the program, then we'll talk about the application, and then finally the evaluation process, which will be the process that you all will be engaged in very soon. So for the program overview, the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program is a $420 million federal program through the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. It was originally announced in May of 2023 and is funded through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, so it's COVID relief. And this funding was allocated to each U.S. state and territory, with Wisconsin receiving $27 million in grant funding, but actually around $28.2 million total, making ours the second largest program in the country, behind only California. In the first round of funding, we awarded 71 recipients with infrastructure and equipment-only grants. And so in the first round, there was an option for a much larger project or award up to $3 million, and it also included self-funded match dollars. That will not be happening again. We're just running a second round for equipment-only grants. And this second round is not new funding, but it's been designed to award the remaining funds allocated to Wisconsin back in 2023. And I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but if you have any questions, just come off mute and interrupt me at any time. So the goals of the RFSI program include improving food and ag supply chain resiliency, expanding the middle of the food supply chain capacity for locally and regionally produced foods, offering more and better market opportunities to small to mid-sized producers, and increasing access to value-added opportunities and processing infrastructure. So by middle of the food supply chain, we're really talking about post-harvest and pre-consumer activities, including processing and packaging, storage and aggregation, and distribution. When we talk about resilience, we mean increased diversity, distribution, and more local. So this is a quote from the original program guidance provided by the USDA that I think provides good context for this. The pandemic and recent supply chain disruptions have revealed the perils of a national food system that depends on capacity concentrated in a few geographic areas and requires many steps to get from farm to fork. To be more resilient, the food system of the future needs to be more diversified, distributed, and local. So the details of this, the grant in particular, this equipment-only grant, awards range from $10,000 up to $99,999, and it can include multiple pieces of equipment. This is really important and probably a key hurdle for a lot of folks. Equipment must be purchased by December 31st of this year. It's a really short timeline. We had originally anticipated having until mid-2027-ish to expend the remaining funds. But USDA somewhat recently shortened the timeline on us, so this is a very expedited grant process. Equipment can be new or used, but must fall into an eligible expense category, and those include food processing equipment, cold storage, forklifts and skid steers, and special purpose delivery vehicles. Equipment must be used for middle of the supply chain activities, and so those include, again, aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, packaging, transporting, wholesaling, distribution of locally and regionally produced eligible food products. So what are those eligible food products? They're those for human consumption, including specialty crops like fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, herbs, dairy, eggs, grains, aquaculture, honey, maple syrup, and others. Importantly, the products ineligible for funding are meat, poultry, wild-caught seafood, animal feed and forage products, fiber, landscaping products, tobacco, and dietary supplements. The reason for meat and poultry specifically being excluded from this grant program is that at the same time that RFSI was originally released, there was also the Meat and Poultry Supply Chain Resiliency Grant. So it kind of had its own separate pot of funding. This is also important. Equipment items that require ground disturbance or infrastructure, like construction or renovation prior to their installation, will not be considered. So for example, a cold storage unit that requires a concrete pad to be poured prior to installation, or a kitchen that requires some somewhat significant construction or renovation prior to the equipment being able to be used. And the reason for that is that federally funded grants, grant awards, they must undergo an environmental review process that's required by federal law, and there's just simply not enough time to complete the review required for ground disturbing activities prior to the funding deadline. And then finally, subrecipients will have to pay for project costs themselves and then seek reimbursement from DACCAP. And that's just a standard process for DACCAP. We rarely, if ever, award the money and allow it to be used. It's typically, if not always, a situation where grant funds will be reimbursed for items that have already been contracted in a grant award, but the subrecipient must front the costs of those expenditures. Okay, so now for the application overview. We're currently in the middle of the application process being open. The request for proposals is currently open. People are applying now, and applications are due this coming Monday at 5 p.m. So eligible applicants, they include many different groups, not just farmers, although agricultural producers and processors are probably the primary applicants to this program, but also for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, local governments, tribal governments, and institutions such as school districts, for example. Again, eligible applicants must be engaged in middle of the food supply chain activities. They must have domestically owned facilities located in the state of Wisconsin or on tribal lands. And for-profit entities must meet the SBA, the Small Business Administration's small business size standards. So you have to, if you are a for-profit business, including being an agricultural producer or processor that's for-profit, you must be small enough by the standards set forth by the SBA. Application materials are comprised of the grant proposal form. That's a standard form provided to us by the USDA, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Every piece of requested equipment needs to have an associated quote or estimate to substantiate its cost. The critical resources and infrastructure letter, which we'll also talk about in a moment. And then letters of support are optional. And for this round, we're allowing up to 3 to be submitted. So the grant proposal looks something like this. Like I said, it's the primary application form, and very specific guidance was provided in the request for proposals for how we were asking applicants to complete this. And the last page of this document contains the project budget, which, like I said, is to be supported by attached quotes, estimates, bids, etc. The critical resources and infrastructure letter is, they were provided this template, so Word document template, and it's designed to be a brief letter to the reviewers generally, and it should verify that all necessary resources and infrastructure are in place to install and use the requested equipment. So for example, like I said in my example earlier with the cold storage unit, this would be a great place for an applicant to tell you as the reviewer that they already have a concrete pad or a place within their pack shed for the cold storage unit to be installed and used. Because, like I said, equipment requiring ground disturbance or construction or renovation will not be considered. This is also a great place to say, for example, if they're requesting a piece of processing equipment, to talk about the other items of equipment that they already have that will be used in that processing or packaging line, If they're requesting a delivery vehicle and they already happen to have a fleet of delivery vehicles, they could talk about that here, and why they're requesting an additional vehicle. If they lease their space, their warehouse, for example, they could verify that they have the necessary permissions or approvals to install their requested piece of equipment, things like that. And in most cases, this letter will be the applicant themselves, though it's also allowed in the case of a warehouse lease that the person that they're leasing from, they could write that letter as well. And then, like I said, letters of support, they're optional. However, they do factor into the score, so they were encouraged. And a maximum of 3 are allowed. So if they're all contained in one PDF document, and there happen 3, I mean, we're going to check for that before we send these documents to you, but it's going to be a huge volume of files that we're going to have to sift through and send in a very short period of time. So if something slips past our radar and there are more than 3 letters of support contained in the same PDF document, stop reading after 3. That was all that was permitted. They should be signed and on some identifying document, for example, letterhead. And they can be used to highlight a project's importance, impact, and benefits from the viewpoint of project partners, external stakeholders, the community in general, other supply chain entities that the main applicant is working with, has a relationship with, and then just project beneficiaries generally. So like I said, super quick grant timeline that unfortunately is out of our control. We opened the application period June 19th, I believe, and it closes Monday, July 21st at 5 p.m. Then our internal team will take probably a maximum of 2 days to download everything, pre-screen it, which is just a very brief checklist, just making sure that all of the correct documents were submitted and they're able to be opened and viewed. And then we will get to work sending those documents out to you for review. We anticipate having those sent to you by July 24th, but you're probably going to get emails from us over maybe a day or so as we get those rolled out. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. You will have until Sunday, August 10th at the very end of the day to submit those reviews. And then after we receive your scores and comments, we'll go through them. The top scoring projects will be recommended for USDA review and approval. So kind of mid-August, once we've had the chance to review the scores and the top scoring proposals, that is when we anticipate sending letters of no fund and then letters of intent to submit the project to USDA for their review and approval. We anticipate hearing back from them around mid-October to have contracts signed again, hopefully before the end of October. And then 2 months, hopefully a little bit longer than that, for equipment purchasing, which needs to be completed by December 31st of this year. So just kind of to put your role in this process into perspective. I will also note here that I will be on vacation, which was unfortunately planned before we found out about this updated timeline, the first week-ish of the review. So July 26th through August 1st. However, I will have my computer with me and will be checking email probably once or twice a day. And you can feel free to give me a call. I will be responsive to questions. Chad, my colleague, will still be working, and I'll provide his contact information. He can probably respond to you quicker. I just may not be quite as prompt as usual, but I'm going to do my best. And then finally, the evaluation process. So evaluations, that's obviously the part of the process that you will be involved in. And proposals are being reviewed primarily for these 5 main categories, which are project readiness, project need, project impact, project support, and then their budget. There's a total of 100 points available, but I wanted to note that receiving 100 points is not expected. The evaluation process is designed not to grade applications like a test necessarily, but rather to generate a bell curve of above average, average, and below average proposals. It is not the job of the reviewer to give the benefit of the doubt or make assumptions on behalf of applicants. Proposals either have the information or they don't. We anticipate a competitive application pool, and while there is a lot of need for equipment, we only have the funds to support the strongest proposals. This said, please take into account that proposals will range from a wide variety of proposals from a wide range of applicant types were strongly encouraged. Folks with a diverse set of experiences have applied for the RFSI grant. Farmers and supply chain partners, large organizations with the help of professional grant writers, business owners, and nonprofit board members with English as a second language. Grant writing is its own language, and we want to recognize that people are applying to this opportunity with varying levels of experience with it. As you are evaluating applications, really consider the intent of the grant and how well each proposed project works towards its goals. Basically, we need to know, do we have enough information to consider this a good investment under the RFSI program? So with that being said, I will move to the rubric now. So bear with me just a second. Can we see that?
Yep.
Cool, thank you. So this is the rubric, and this isn't going to be what, I'll explain that in a second. This is how you're going to be evaluating applications. This is just kind of a reviewer disclosure, some general instructions, and a little bit of information about the application materials that we just talked about. So this is going to be designed a little bit differently for those of you who participated in this process during the first round. I've set up the rubric a little bit differently based on the feedback that I received from several of you to make the review a little bit more objective in terms of kind of the range of responses in terms of what they'd be worth in points. So hopefully this is a more effective way and you feel a little bit more supported in your decision making on adding and subtracting points. So it will be set up in terms of those 5 main categories that I just talked about. And then each is broken down into criteria, usually between 2 and 4 different criteria within each category. So for each category, you're going to have the response location. So this will be where in the application you can expect to find the information to adequately score that section. And then it's broken into an exemplary response, kind of what an average response might look like, and then what a poor response might look like. And so you're not going to be scoring the applications on this PDF. There's an online system that I'm going to show you in a second, but this is kind of the basis for how the review is designed. And you'll have access to this form in its table format if that kind of helps you to visualize sort of the rubric and what we're looking for. So I'll just run through this pretty quickly. So in terms of readiness, what we're looking for the applicant to clearly describe current business operations, including services and products offered, as well as current or future partnerships that suggest they are well positioned to fully support the purposes of the grant program. And those are outlined here. And I will also say you have the ability to score anywhere between either 0 and 10 points or 0 and 5 points based on how much that criterion is weighted. And you'll see that a little bit more clearly in a moment. Further in the category of readiness, We are hopeful that the applicant will clearly demonstrate having the background, experience, skills, identified partners, and financial capacity necessary for the successful implementation and sustainability of their proposal, as well as the ongoing business viability beyond the life of the grant. We hope for them to clearly and compellingly affirm that any awarded equipment will be purchased on or before December 31st of this year. And you can see that for the response locations, this is a question that's on that main proposal form, but then it's also possible that they discuss this criterion within the critical resources and infrastructure letter. And so you'll see both of those listed here. And then finally, in the category of readiness, we need to see that the critical resources and/or infrastructure necessary to support the initiation and completion of the project are in place and clearly outlined. In the category of need, we first need the applicant to identify a clear and compelling middle of the supply chain issue, problem, or need that the project aims to address. Then we hope that the proposed project effectively addresses this identified issue, problem, or need through eligible program activities. And then finally, that addressing that issue, problem, or need fully supports the RFSI program goals, which are again listed. In the category of impact, and you'll see that all three of these are weighted at a score of 10, whereas in the previous two examples, there were some criterion that were listed as 10 max and some with 5 max. That the applicant will clearly describe the project impact that will strengthen the resiliency of the broader middle of the food supply chain in Wisconsin and/or chains in its communities, counties, regions, tribal lands, and into its border states. So not necessarily the entire food supply chain of the state of Wisconsin is what I mean by that. And then again, greater resiliency means more diversified, distributed, and local. We hope that the proposal clearly describes how this project will create expanded market opportunities for producers, processors, and other middle of the supply chain operations in Wisconsin beyond benefiting only the main applicant. This project will result in increased competitive and profitable market access for Wisconsin farm products. And then there's a table in the application form where they're asked to list expected performance measures based on various indicators or outcomes. And so we asked for specific reference to be made to these numbers in the tables to provide sufficient context and justification for their anticipated project outcomes, and that these expected numbers are compelling based on the project's scope and program's goals and reasonably achievable based on the provided explanation. Project support. So both that the applicant articulates the project support that they have from outside parties, beneficiaries, partners, stakeholders, etc. But then also that letters of support are included in compelling, emphasizing this full project support on behalf of the letter writers, which should hopefully connect to the individuals or organizations that they've discussed themselves in the application. And finally, the budget. All requested budget items are eligible costs under the program, and each is justified via the budget narrative as reasonably necessary to the success of the project. Each item needs to be supported by an estimate, quote, or bid substantiating its cost, like I said, and that sufficient information is provided based on the budget table, the justification section, and the supporting documentation to clearly explain how their requested funds have been derived. And lastly, how each budget item will be used, when, and for what is provided. No assumptions need to be made to understand the purposes and intentions for the equipment. So that's the basis and the information that we would like to see from strong proposals. And then again, there are kind of examples or guidelines for what maybe an average response might look like, and then a poor response to help you kind of understand that bell curve. Let me get back to the presentation, sorry. for the jumping around. Okay, so that's the information on how to score applications, but what will the process actually look like? So for each application that you're being asked to review, you'll receive an email that looks something like this. It will have the name of the applicant and then a link to get you to the system that we're using to complete this review. So it'll be a system-generated email. Again, you'll receive one per application, but then you'll also receive an email from me with a checklist of all of the applications that you're being asked to review. So then you can kind of use that checklist to ensure that A, you received all of the emails with links that you were supposed to, and then B, kind of use it to make sure that you've completed all of the reviews. And we won't know, obviously, how many applications we're receiving until the deadline, because people love to wait until the last second to apply to grant programs. But I'm hopeful that we have plenty of you for that number of applications to be less than 10. So clicking on the link in that email will take you to a page that looks like this. We're using the Access Gov system, which is where you'll complete the evaluation in an internet browser. And account creation is strongly recommended because having an account allows you to save and exit without losing progress on a form. And I will just make a note that the save and exit feature worked for the majority of our reviewers last year, but there were some that fell victim to improperly saved evaluations and who had to start over. So because technology is not always our friend, it would be my recommendation to complete each evaluation from beginning to end if it's possible. But if it's not, just really remembering to hit that save and exit button at the bottom if you need to step away for a bit. And what I mean by from beginning to end is just one individual review. Each one will be independent of the others. So if you complete one review and then don't get back to it for a couple of days and then come back, that won't be an issue. And the save and exit shouldn't be an issue, but I don't want you to get into a situation where you've done a lot of work and lose it. And so you'll just, for the first time when you're creating an account, you'll just click on the public user button, and then there's a sign up button at the bottom. I think that you just need to put in your name, email, and create a password. It's pretty simple. And then once you're logged in, you should see something like this. And so now I'll jump around once more to actually go into that system and walk you through it. Excellent. Here we go. Okay, can we see that? Okay.
Yeah, we could see
Okay, thank you. Okay, so when you click on a link in one of those emails, it will take you to this page once you're logged in. It will not say test mode at the top because it will be the real deal. But this is how it should look for you. So it'll take you to this landing page. It will say, please note that progress on this form will only be saved if you're logged in, but it's recommended that you complete this review in its entirety. And then the evaluation rubric. So the document that I just walked you through there will be a button at the bottom of the page, like here-ish, that you can click on to open up that PDF if viewing it in the table format is just preferred. All of the information that was in that document that I just showed you will be contained in the following screens online. But just at least for me, it's helpful to view it in that table layout, which is not how it's laid out. And you'll see that in a second. And then there's also a link here if you want or need for any reason to access the request for proposals. And then finally, there is a link to download the most updated Adobe Reader if your computer doesn't have that, because the application form is a tricky file and it can only be viewed using the most updated version of Adobe Reader, and it's just kind of like the biggest headache of this grant program. But if you have that, it should be pretty easy, and if you don't have it, it's easy and free to download at this link. So you're going to begin the application evaluation. Like I said, this is all stuff that we've been through, but some general instructions. You're going to acknowledge the disclosure, and then it will bring you to the page where you can download the application materials. So at the top of each page, it will say the applicant's name. And super quickly, I want to shout out Chris Anderson. He's on the call, and I neglected to introduce him at the beginning, so I'm sorry for that. But he is responsible for creating the system for us, and I'm so grateful to him. And so, yeah, that is your introduction to Chris. All of the application forms will be listed here and available to click the link to download. This grant proposal form, which is the primary application form, is that tricky file that I just mentioned, and it will not allow you to open it in the browser. So if you're prompted to open it in the browser, you will get this page, and you can wait as long as you want, but it's never going to show up. So what you're going to need to do is download it to your computer downloads, which I should have just done. Here it is. And then you're going to open it from your computer downloads and make sure that it opens. Awesome. In.
Hey, Grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the easiest way to do that is you can, when it downloads in the dialog in your browser, you can generally, you can right click on that in your browser and instruct it to open it in Adobe.
Okay.
Or you can say show in folder there.
Yep.
And then it'll open up the folder for you, and then you can right click it. Depending on your computer settings, many people have their default PDF viewer is a web browser. But if you right click on the file, you can say open in Adobe Acrobat. That's the best way to deal with it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Sorry, I was sharing my screen or going through that as he was talking, but I'm sharing a window and not a screen. So give me 1 second. Okay, you should be seeing my screen now, not just a window. But what Chris just said is that if you download this and then open it in your downloads folder, you should be able to right click it and open it with Adobe Acrobat, which will bring you to the form itself, which looks like this. And once you do that one time, I mean, it sounds like a lot of steps, but it's really just working around a system that may want you to automatically open that file in an internet browser, which just for whatever reason doesn't work with this file. So anyway, you're going to download all of the documents, hit next, and then it will bring you to the review. And so you're able to navigate between the different categories freely by using the sidebar. And each of them are listed with the total number of points available in each category. And then all of the information from that PDF document that I shared with you earlier is listed here, just in a little bit different format. So you'll have the application location, the description for an exemplary response, an average response, and a poor response, and then a drop down to be able to select the number of points that you're assigning to that application in this category for this particular criterion. So you're going to do that for however many are listed on the page. And then once you get to the bottom of the page, it's going to prompt you for a reviewer comment. And this does not have to be lengthy. We just ask that you provide a comment on each of the 5 sections that may be shared with the applicant. We can assume that it will be, and that's what we should be assuming when we're writing these comments, but constructive, a justification for why points were removed or awarded. Basically, this application verified that they would purchase equipment by December 31st, but it is unclear that they have the necessary warehouse space to be able to house this equipment and start using it immediately, something like that. So you're going to be prompted to do that at the end of each of these categories. And my recommendation would be, just as an order of operations, when you reach a new criterion that you're about to score, I would read through the exemplary description and then navigate to the application, read that section provided by the application location section, read that section, and then come back to this form, and if needed, read the average and poor descriptions before making your selection for the point value. I won't walk through all of these because we already did, but essentially all of the same for each of these 5 categories. And then at the end, you'll be asked to include a summary of your evaluation to be shared with the applicant. And like I said, we ask that the summary is written constructively and adequately summarizes your justification for the total score you assigned this application. And this can just be the 5 previous comments that you listed in each of the categories, just copied and pasted here to be an aggregate comment as a summarization of your evaluation. You can write something new. It just should be kind of an overview of maybe the strongest and weakest parts of the application. And it doesn't have to be wordy, but we just need something to be able to share with the applicant to say, here's what you could do better next time. This is why you received the score that you did. After you do that, you'll be taken to this page that will show you what the total score is out of 100 that you provided to that application. And then once you hit submit, it will generate an email to me with a PDF of your evaluation, including all of your scores and your comments. And I'm looking at my notes, but I think that was all I had to share. Questions?
Hey, Grace, I just have one quick reminder on the emails that are generated for the request to review the applications.
Yep.
So we're working on a function that allows the link in the email that you'll be getting to essentially that link is active for 1 week right now after you receive it. We're working with our vendor to make it so that the link can be active for longer than that, up through potentially the end of the review period. But if we're not able to do that before the application deadline, we have the ability to resend these emails with the links. And if you get a second one because you're not able to get to that application right away, just make sure that you're clicking on the link in the most recent email that you got for this.
Okay, that is super important. Thank you for sharing that. I'll also note that I sent you a packet of review examples that I ran through, and those were all applications that were received in the first round. 2 of them were funded, and it just kind of gives you an example of some of the reviewer comments, what those could look like, and hopefully provides a little bit more context on how you might consider evaluating an application against the provided rubric. You'll have my contact information, and Chad, who isn't able to be on this session today, but you'll have his contact information as well. Like I said, the first week of this review, I won't be at my computer regularly, but I will still be checking emails, texts, phone calls, and we'll get back to you as soon as I can. I hope this is a process that sets you up for good success. We really appreciate your time and your expertise, and we just thank you so much for being the reason that this funding can make it out the door. Michaela.
Hey, Grace. Thanks for the really great overview. I'm just curious if you have an estimate of how much time we should budget for this review.
Yeah, I think at least when I was doing it, when I reviewed those 3 proposals that I sent you in that zip file in the email, it definitely goes faster as you do it a couple of times. I would say that the first one probably took 40 minutes, but then by the time I did the third one, probably 15 to 20 minutes. As you get familiar with the evaluation criteria and what you're looking for, it becomes a much more efficient process. So if you receive 10 applications to review and each one takes, I don't know, we'll say an average of half an hour. What is that? 5 hours? Hopefully less. And please submit the payment paperwork. If you didn't participate in the review last time and you're not a state employee. So then we can get you set up in our payment system for that $300 stipend. Were there any other questions? Okay. I'll send you a link to this recording as soon as it's able to be posted on our YouTube page, so you'll have access to that. I don't think there's any other information that you'll be getting from me until late next week, when you'll start receiving those emails and the checklist from me. And I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but each application will be reviewed by 3 people. So I've divided you up into 11, or are there 12? No, there's 11 committees, and 3 of you in each of those committees. So however many applications we get divided by those 11 committees, all 3 of you will be sent the same applications to review independently, but we'll take the aggregate of your scores in considering who will be selected for this funding. And with that, I will thank you sincerely one more time and hope that you have a great rest of the week. Thanks for being here.